Good evening. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Spotlight event from the Tampa Bay Times. My name is Conan Gallaty. I'm the CEO and chairman of the Times Publishing Company, and we're so happy to have you with us for this very important discussion. If you go back to late 2024, you'd be forgiven if you weren't from this area to think that after a few months of the hurricanes that ravaged the Tampa Bay area, that all was well and good going into 2025. That after the floodwaters receded, that after the streets were cleared, that the homes were fully restored and everything was back to normal. Over the weeks that we saw the intense damage, the visuals of swamp streets, flooded homes, soggy debris in yards and street corners, those visuals were strong and those visuals were captivating. But as we all know, over the months that followed, long after the national news outlets had left town, that the long story of recovery was only beginning. And as residents started to rebuild their homes and find out if they could still live where they had lived before. And news outlets like the Times proudly chronicled that long story, and we continue to today. But underneath the surface of that reporting revealed another story, a story about what happens in that recovery, how the fabric of those communities begins to fray, how that connective tissue of living next to your neighbor for long enough to create a bond begins to break. And so the deeper story that we discuss tonight is of what happens to our communities when climate begins to erode the ability to live next to each other. As we rebuild, as many folks told us we would, and we did, how we rebuild mattered a lot to who remained. So tonight is a difficult topic, and we expect some difficult questions and some challenging answers. That's okay. That is what our Spotlight series intends to do. We don't look for the simple things, we ask the harder questions. These aren't going to be perfect answers because there is no simple, perfect answer for what we're going to discuss tonight. But we believe in raising the level of debate. And I'm excited tonight to have the key elements that we need to do that. First, we have a wonderful Times journalist that you'll get to meet who's got some insightful questions. And those questions are for the people behind me, a panel of experts who know this topic well, who may agree or disagree with each other. That's okay too, because the spirit of tonight is to listen closely to each other, to be thoughtful in our answers and in our questions. And the third element is all of you, because I imagine each and every one of you has a thought or two about this and a question too. And so we're gonna ask you to participate in our Q&A section. We'll have the ability for you to write down your questions for the panel, and we want to hear what's on your mind and what questions you have for them. I have a lot of gratitude tonight, not just for you being here with us, but also for the people in the organizations that make it possible. I'd like to start with this wonderful facility, the Palladium, that was kind enough to let us have this debate here tonight. Please, let's give a round of applause to the Palladium. And if you would, just take a moment to kind of look around as the aesthetic of this place. As you saw in the video earlier, there is a big capital campaign. I hope you'll participate in that. Perhaps you want to put your name on the very seat you're sitting in. We hope you'll support the Palladium. This is a special historic place, and it should remain to be. And I can't wait to come back here at this location again, hopefully for another conversation just like this, in an even new and improved Palladium for all of the residents of St. Pete to use. The second group that I want to thank is our sponsor tonight, the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg. The foundation has been a wonderful partner with the Times in these Spotlight events, bringing up the topics that are hard and challenging, but are needed in this time of divided society. The foundation, like the Times, believes we need elevated debate. We need to tackle the hard topics, and that we need to listen to each other with care and with compassion. Let's watch a video about the great work that the foundation does in our community.
At the foundation, we know that optimal health outcomes and well-being should be an attainable reality for all of us, regardless of our race, regardless of our ethnicity, our gender, geography, or income. We also know that all too often this just is not the case. So we are working to advance racially equitable health outcomes in our community by improving the systems and conditions that shape them. We do this work through 4 primary pathways. We lead, fund, partner, and advocate. We are working to create equitable opportunities for all of us. This is the data. This is the truth. This is our work. No one can do this work alone. It takes a full ecosystem of support, and we are all a part of that ecosystem. Now that we know better, it's time for us to do better. So let's do so together.
Please help me welcome the star of that video, the president and CEO of the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg, Dr. Kanika Tomlin.
Thank you, Conan, and thank all of you for being here tonight. This topic is so personal for so many people. Mr. Gallaty's remarks very poignantly took us back to 2024, a time our entire community's collective consciousness will never forget. I specifically remember driving along the coastal edge of our city following the storms, from Snell Isle in northeast St. Pete to Harbordale and Bartlett Park in South St. Pete. Along the route, I saw the scene evolve. On Snell Isle, the entirety of people's possessions had been carted out to the curb. Neighborhoods full of waterlogged lifetimes sat waiting to be retrieved. Even if there was no immediate plan for what comes next, it was clear that which had been destroyed would be discarded, and it wasn't hard to imagine the resources by which it all would be replaced. A few miles away, closer to the southern edge of our city, amidst damage just as devastating, I saw families working to air out their storm-soaked belongings. Drying mattresses leaned up against trees, doors and windows left open to let the soaked contents on the inside air out. No new mattress or furniture on its way. This was their reality. Both scenes are devastating, without a doubt, more than any family, regardless of their situation, should ever have to face. But without question, the disparate response underscored the truth that devastation unfolds differently in different parts of our beloved city, as does displacement and recovery. And here's the added complication. Such immediate devastation from storms is only a fraction of the story in our coastal landscape and changing climate, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Tonight's panel will examine the immediate displacement from storm damage, as well as the longer-term downstream displacements driven by subsequent shifts in demand and prices. Our subject matter experts will speak to the realities that happen when severe weather impacts shift our perceptions and willingness to live in certain places. What happens when neighborhoods come to be seen as risky, or when higher, drier places come to be seen as safe and suddenly more desirable? What happens to the people who were already there and have been for generations? And while this is a conversation about housing, climate refugees, and our neighborhoods, it's also a conversation about our built environment and social and community context. It's a conversation about health. Research shows that about 80% of our health outcomes are shaped by the everyday circumstances of our lives. Not the medical care we receive, but the schools we attend, the jobs we are able to access, the relationships and social ties that support us and our physical environment. Specifically, where we live and the relationships we hold are critical to our well-being, and they can be profoundly impacted by our climate. When people are displaced from their neighborhoods, their entire social support system can be disrupted. The neighbor who used to help with yard work, the kind woman who used to watch your little one after school, those people may now be far away. The car that got you to work may not be available. The church you walk down the street to may be shuttered. When climate response forces us to evacuate, what are the forces in our control as a community that ensure we are able to return and to recover and to rebuild? All of those questions have more implications than answers, but we must examine those questions. As president and CEO of the Foundation for a Healthy St. Petersburg, we're a private foundation that works to eradicate health and social disparities. Every day I think about our community's future and the impact of such changes. Change is inevitable, so we must plan for it with clear eyes and focused intention. And in that planning, we must consider all of our residents, especially those who are most vulnerable and least resourced. So this belief that we have drives our excitement to see so many engaged citizens show up for this conversation that contemplates how we might best serve our collective health and well-being amidst climate changes that we see now and know will continue in the future. Our foundation deeply honors its role as conveners in the continuum of change that guides our community forward. That work is happening tonight. You are a part of it. We all have a part to play in our community and our commitment to our community, and we are so proud to partner with the Tampa Bay Times to host tonight's engagement. So again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for examining our community's possibilities for a healthier, more equitable future, and we hope to see you again soon. Now it's my great pleasure to turn tonight's conversation over to Tampa Bay Times environmental reporter, Jack Prater. Jack joined the Times in 2023, and he covers hurricanes, climate change, and development pressures on Florida's natural resources. He'll serve as our moderator this evening of this awesome panel of community leaders who will discuss how Florida's changing weather conditions are impacting our communities, housing, opportunity, affordability, and more. So everyone, I give you Jack Prater.
Thank you all so much for being here. I have the privilege tonight of being joined by this panel of thoughtful community leaders. But before I get started, I wanted to let you all know that we'll be taking questions for a Q&A. Volunteers will be coming around with note cards so you can write down any questions you have. Just raise your hand if you need a note card or you want to turn yours in for questions. Those will begin in about an hour. So, to my right is Claude Tankersley, the Public Works Administrator at the City of St. Petersburg, who also leads the St. Pete Agile Resilience Program. Next is Florida House Representative Lindsay Cross, who represents District 60 and has spent over 2 decades as an environmental scientist. Amber Woods is the youth chairperson for Florida Rising Pinellas County, whose work focuses on how infrastructure and policy decisions impact working families. Mac Feldman is the Vice President of Asset Management at Feldman Equities and the incoming chairperson of the St. Petersburg Downtown Partnership. And Sam Henderson is an adjunct professor of natural sciences at St. Petersburg College who served as the mayor of Gulfport for 12 years. Sam, my first question's for you. After Hurricane Helene, you were one of the earliest voices who were concerned with how your town would change. Many people wouldn't be able to rebuild or elevate their homes, you said. And you told the Times, quote, "I can't do nearly as much as I wish I could to keep things as they are." My question is, nearly 2 years later, how much of Gulfport has changed and what stayed the same?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that stayed the same for the time being is the people who live there. There's a lot of people who are struggling to stay in Gulfport because naturally one of the biggest changes that we've seen is to the 16% of our land area that was affected by storm surge. For those of you who were here for this, and I'm sure most of you are here because you have some connection to what happened with our hurricane. But a lot of these people, in having to rebuild to FEMA-based flood elevation with their homes, that effectively prices people out. So that changes the demographic of who could live by the water when it was already pretty expensive to live there, but we're talking about folks who had homes that maybe had been paid off. They lived there for generations, and now they can't just rebuild. They have to big back higher. So it changes the scale of your city. It changes who's able to live there. And what we've seen since is multiple delays and people having to expend far more money than they anticipated just trying to get their homes back to normal, to get back into their homes, just the most basic step of getting back on with your life. And now we're seeing a real push inland in the area where I live, you know, folks that weren't affected by storm surge. Now we're seeing a lot more development in those areas where people who were frightened by the big wake-up call of something that hasn't happened here to that scale in 70 plus years, now it's become desirable to be maybe a little further away from right at the edge of the water. So it's changing the demographics in terms of economics. We're seeing people being forced out, if not their neighborhood, the city entirely. And you know, sadly, I don't think this is going to be a one-off. I think we should expect to see these things happen more often. The unusual scenario to me is that we went this long without it, and I think it led to one of the things that's been a concern of mine for 15, 20 years now, is complacency. When it doesn't happen for a while, you tend to start feeling a little safer than you actually are, and I think this is going to be something that we're going to deal with again. It's just the risk that's inherent to living this close to water.
Yeah. I'd like to ask the rest of you the same question. How have you seen your neighborhoods change because of rising seas and more extreme weather? Mac, you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm downtown. I'm right by Mirror Lake, and downtown St. Pete has seen a massive influx of population. You've all seen the apartment and condo towers going up left and right in downtown St. Pete. I don't know the exact timeline, but I want to say the past 5 years or so, over half of the county's population in Pinellas has happened in downtown St. Pete. Downtown was in part built there because it is naturally elevated. Over by Mirror Lake where I am, we're over 40 feet up. People don't necessarily realize that when you're walking on Central, you're going up a slight hill the whole time. So it's a good thing from an evacuation, shelter, from a hurricanes bearing down on us. You want people to be high and dry. It also means we're concentrating a lot more people in the same area. I'm a big supporter of that, but it comes with trade-offs. When we're looking at the downtown generally and the growth of the downtown, there's questions of how much are we willing to see this place that a lot of us have gotten used to over many years change? How many people that are displaced from the waterfront can we accommodate in the downtown before we get things like congestions and other externalities? I'm a believer we have a lot more to grow in downtown St. Pete before that's an issue. I'm a huge proponent of that continuing, but it's going to come with trade-offs, and it's going to take very careful and thoughtful planning around things like stormwater and all the things that Claude is working on to make sure we can accommodate it.
I would say the most notable change that my neighborhood, I'm in Wildwood Heights. And I think the only other highest elevation is historic Kenwood. So we're a close second. So we did not experience the flooding. We didn't get the brunt of the issue, but we are experiencing significant infrastructure. Duke Energy is now building a substation, unmanned substation in Wildwood Heights, and it's underground lines, so we won't experience power outages. It's self-healing, waterproof, all the great things that we want to hear, but that brings a problem in itself that is along with climate gentrification. Now suddenly our Wildwood Heights neighborhood looks delicious for developers, and if you are looking to get away from the coast, we're not that far from downtown. So Midtown is perfectly placed, and we know we've been sitting on a jewel here. We have a lot of legacy homeowners that are still there. Our families are tied there. There's strong history there. So there's a lot of concern in our neighborhood.
I live in Crescent Heights neighborhood. Again, a neighborhood that's a little bit higher. So the type of redevelopment we've seen in Crescent Heights, I think, is more in line with the Old Northeast, where it's not necessarily storm damage, but it's smaller homes that are being replaced with much larger homes, taking up considerable amount of the lots. There's a few instances where there's duplexes there, And I think that's an excellent way to maximize some of our neighborhoods. And something that you see done really well in the Old Northeast is some of that mixed use and apartments and, duplexes or quads right next to single-family homes. The district that I represent includes the neighborhoods of Shore Acres and Riviera Bay, who have become, in some case, nationally known for the flooding impacts from Hurricane Helene. I know that the city has estimated over 10,000 homes in St. Pete flooded during Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Many of those were in Shore Acres and Riviera Bay. Those neighborhoods have changed and will continue to change. One of the most significant reasons is because homeowners have been waiting for government assistance from FEMA or from the state to help elevate or rebuild their homes, and programs have not been able to deliver money and assistance to those homeowners soon enough. That's an issue that I've been working on with some of our federal delegation, but that relief can't come fast enough for people who are paying both a mortgage and maybe paying to live in an apartment, having to rent furniture, really shift their life in the hopes that they can get some assistance to rebuild in the community where they want to be, where their children have grown up and their schools are. So in those communities, we're seeing a lot of new development, elevated homes, safer homes, but with a larger footprint, again, and not necessarily at the price point that's attainable for the people who have been living in those neighborhoods for decades.
So I live in West St. Pete, in an area that a lot of people think, oh, that's safe. It's elevated, it's flat, there's no problem out there. But there were problems out there. And that's one of the things I think these storms showed us, is that in certain circumstances, pretty much anywhere in Florida, and definitely anywhere in St. Pete, is at risk. I had a lot of people say to me who lived in some of these central neighborhoods, well, my neighborhood is not in a flood zone, I don't have flood insurance, I didn't expect to flood. And unfortunately, when you look at the aerial photographs of St. Pete from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, you'll see that a lot of St. Pete had these kind of divots that were wet and that were always wet. And when we built up St. Pete, we found ways to drain these areas by putting in canals and ditches and everything, but that didn't eliminate the fact that these are areas that are little divots, and you have enough rain, and they're gonna get wet again. And so you had areas like Holiday Park. Never thought ever they would see anything. But unfortunately, Miles Creek, which drains it into Joe's Creek, couldn't handle the rain, and hundreds of homes in that neighborhood in a supposedly safe part of the city did flood. So that's one of the changes that I've seen, is that people are starting to understand that even a 6-inch elevation difference can make a difference when we have the heavy rains. I can speak for my own personal experiences that my house is about 6 inches higher than the houses 1 block over. The houses 1 block over got water up into their yards, not into their house, but up into their yards. My yard and my house was dry, just from 6 inches. And so it's given us an opportunity to learn how to continue to live in St. Pete, make St. Pete prosper and grow and be the wonderful place to live, but also live within St. Pete as it naturally is, to learn to live with the water.
Yeah, the rainfall caught a lot of people off guard this time around. Amber, I'd like to go back to something you said about climate gentrification. I was hoping you could explain the concept a little bit here. How have you seen climate change pricing longtime residents out of their communities? Is it housing costs, insurance, cost of living, and where are people going?
So climate gentrification, we already, our black and brown neighborhoods are already experiencing the cycle of gentrification. Now we have a new kind of gentrification on top of it, and it comes from all the effects of climate change. And people are being priced out for many different reasons, on many different levels. It is the insurance. It is, like I mentioned with the substation, as the more these infrastructure programs are going on, and we're fighting for equity on that, we don't want to be left out, but the catch is your home values are increasing, which increases your taxes. And if you're lucky to get insurance, if you can find any, but wages are not increasing with it. So that's the challenge that our neighborhoods are facing. People are, when you say where people are going, it's kind of multi-phase. You go to your relative first. So you have multi-generational households that were already happening. Now it's happening on a larger scale, overcrowding. They got a lot of kids, I've seen 3 bedrooms with 12 people living there. And that's a real reality. I've seen that a lot, as a matter of fact, over the past maybe 5 years. Excuse me. So from there, if you can afford to relocate, then you move up north. You go Clearwater, you go Newport Richey, you go Brooksville, you go as far north as you can. Even I'm considering purchasing property north. There's more, I'd rather have more land than house. In St. Pete, you get more house than land. So, you know, it's a real thing for me to consider myself. So people are going, I've seen people have to move out of state because their housing voucher, they can't find anything here in close, having to uproot and change jobs. And, you know, so the going, there are people even living in the homes with the damage because they can't go anywhere. They don't have relatives. They don't have that, the anchor. A lot of people are not from here, so they're living in the house. They got the damage to the roofs, and the money's just getting here. The hurricanes happened years ago, and the money for repairs is just getting here, and now you got to stand in line for the money. So those are the challenges. Those are the challenges with going. Those are the things that come with the word going.
Mac, you also know where people are going to, being in real estate. Can you tell us what other migration patterns you're seeing locally? You know, is the waterfront still desirable to people in the area?
Yeah, so I'm a believer that the waterfront will always be desirable, but putting my public policy hat on, I'll put, you know, it's not exactly what Claude does, but we talk about land use in real estate a lot. Those are the rules and regulations that say, what can you put on this parcel of land? Is it just a single family home with a detached garage? Is it a duplex like Rep. Cross was talking about? Can you put a big apartment tower there, a condo tower? There's a whole smorgasbord of options of how development can go over time. Land use could change tomorrow, but you won't actually see the effect of that for a generation, literally decades, is the timeline on which land use changes play out on. For me, what Amber was talking about intersected a lot with what Rep. Cross was talking about. We have this dilemma where people are in a home on the waterfront and they don't have the money to rebuild it, to elevate it, to do what's necessary to comply with FEMA regulations. There's a 50% rule I'm sure many of you are familiar with. All these issues then intersect with housing affordability. Where do we put more housing so that we can bring housing prices down, accommodate all the people that are moving here, while balancing that against how do we not put a bunch of people right on a waterfront that we are pretty darn sure is about to flood imminently? I think we have to assume this is going to keep happening and it's going to get worse. So how do you balance those issues of affordability and growing supply with where the housing is going and displacement concerns? A lot of our highest and driest neighborhoods are interior, off the waterfront. That means if you're densifying only there and not on the waterfront, well, guess what? That's going to exacerbate displacement in a lot of these historically more affordable neighborhoods. So balancing all these issues is why I don't envy the policymakers that actually have to wrestle with this stuff. It's really challenging. To answer your question more directly, Jack, I think downtown is going to see a tremendous influx. And we're doing a development project here in downtown St. Pete. I don't know what percent exactly, but it's a significant percent, are a family that had a home on the waterfront somewhere. Even if they didn't get whacked in the flood directly, They're sick of dealing with the anxiety, the stress of the storm is coming, got to tape up the bottom of your doors, and who's going to take care of the dog? And that stress is going to drive more and more people into towers and denser structures that are more modern, not the 1950s single-family home near the water in a floodplain that's on grade. It's pretty much guaranteed to keep flooding. So it's going to be a challenging set of policy decisions that our local and state officials are going to have to make, and balancing those priorities against each other are going to be difficult.
Yeah, that's a good segue, because you touched on what government can do here. And so I guess my next question is for you, Claude, but I'd like Representative Cross to weigh in as well after. You both work at different levels of government. What responsibility do city and state governments have to protect people and property as climate change exacerbates, these problems that vulnerable areas face?
Hopefully I'll have the perfect answer and he'll just say, that's what she said, right? Well, government at all levels can be helpful or they can make the situation worse. I think by and large, at the local level, we have officials and we have community leaders that are trying to do the right thing for their community. It's very difficult to plan for all of the needs of the community, the things that Mac mentioned. Where is the place for the right density? How are we going to include the sewer, the infrastructure that it's needed to support these communities? How do we make them walkable, put green space in? There's a lot that goes into planning. Unfortunately, at the state level, when cities like St. Petersburg are trying to do things that are proactive, that maybe don't fit the model that the development community that's easier and maybe a little bit less expensive or less burdensome, Tallahassee is really good at preempting those and making it difficult or impossible for good projects and proactive planning and redevelopment to happen. Couple examples, after the 2024 storms, there was a major bill called SB 180, which was focused on emergency preparedness and response. I was able to work with Senator Sigley to get a few good things in there, focused on making sure that communities had some basic things in place, that everyone had a plan for where their debris would be staged. So particularly our small communities that didn't have any place to put the debris, and we're all calling the county, who was afraid their landfill was going to fill up because all these other communities hadn't prepared. That's not acceptable anymore, and every community has to have a pre-approved, at least one debris site. Department of Emergency Management has also created a template so that every municipality has a disaster plan in place. You would think that that's common sense, particularly living in a coastal community, but not everyone had those things in place. SB 180 also put in a few provisions in there that make it very difficult for communities to rebuild the right way. And in particular, there's the phrase more restrictive or burdensome that limits the ability of a city or a county to put in any new guidelines that could be seen as more restrictive or burdensome. You can probably figure out that you could make the case that anything was more restrictive or burdensome. If the sidewalk had to be 1 millimeter higher, that's a little bit more cement, that's more restrictive and burdensome. A developer can tell the city, that's against the law, we can sue you for that. So a lot of these proactive things that would take density away from the most vulnerable areas, that would make things more walkable, more livable, that would incorporate transit, unfortunately have been preempted by Tallahassee. And there needs to be more effort to get some of those things reversed so that our cities can continue to govern and meet the needs of the people.
Thank you, Representative Cross. I want to give you some praise because oftentimes cities and states, have problems working with each other, but you've been a great partner to us. And you may have heard, I'm going to let you know if you haven't heard, that Representative Cross, working with Senator DeSigley, has brought in over the last 2 years $3 million to help with stormwater flooding in Shore Acres. So thank you. Thank you. And the point I really am trying to make is that to answer your question directly, what role does government have? Yes, period. That's the answer. And not only is it local government, but it's state government and county government. And one of the reasons why is because government is of the people, by the people. We are the people. We represent the people. And in order for us to overcome these challenges and be resilient, we have to go a little bit beyond our normal American individualism and realize that we are a community and work together as a community, work together as a local government and the county government and the state government. And so what I just described that you did for us is a way that the governments can and are working together. But you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, we are limited right now in making any changes to our land use policies. I do believe there is a clause in there that it'll sunset at some point. And so hopefully we won't have any storms that will allow it to be extended. And then after it sunsets, we'll be able to address those land use policies. You know, in terms of helping out the community, one of the challenges that you may not recognize or realize is that as a local government, as a city government, we are on the lowest end of the totem pole of the hierarchy of government agencies in the state of Florida. And so being at the local, at the lowest point of the totem pole, we have fewer options available to us to really find ways to address problems. A city does not have the opportunity to implement sales taxes. A city does not have the opportunity to implement gas taxes. We are limited in what fees and taxes we can generate, and I know nobody likes taxes, nobody likes fees, but without revenue coming into the local community, the local government, we cannot then distribute that revenue back to the community to build that resilience into the community, to help the communities that are struggling, that can't do it on their own. And so it is a real challenge that we have, but I'm an optimist, and I believe we will achieve it, and we've been working on plans to get us there.
Sounds like you have to get creative. Again, Claude, the 2024 hurricanes, you know, they revealed some weak points in our infrastructure. I was hoping you could tell us what the city's done to make communities drier and safer and what you think is left to do.
There's a lot left to do. And so part of the challenge, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is that we failed to develop the community correctly in the first place by learning to live with St. Pete as it naturally is, St. Pete as it naturally wants to be. And so we sought to over-engineer it. I am an engineer, and so I can criticize myself. We sought to over-engineer it and thought we could conquer it, just like we thought we could conquer the Everglades at one point. And so we drained St. Pete, areas that would be naturally wet. We drained them. But we didn't elevate them, we just built canals and creeks to drain them. And unfortunately, as the storms showed, those drainage systems are no longer adequate. And so we can look at perhaps increasing that drainage, but here's part of the problem. If you've got a creek, let's take Bear Creek, for example. You've got a Bear Creek has a narrow channel, and it has a wider floodplain, but we've built into the floodplain. We've built homes, private property, right up against the edge of the creek. And so our opportunity to really expand the capacity of that creek is extremely limited because we have all these homes built right up against it. So we have to get creative. One of the things that Mayor Welch said to me after the storms was, Claude, figure out how we can do things more quickly, how we can be more agile. And that's how we came up with the St. Pete Agile Resilience. And the SPAR program, as we call it, has looked out to 24 years. We've looked out to the year 2050 to figure out what do we need to do to try to make ourselves more resilient in terms of public infrastructure, like stormwater, drinking water, wastewater. We estimate that based off the data we have right now, it's going to be about $2.7 billion. That's a billion with a B, $1 billion to get this done. And we're not talking about building brand new facilities, we're talking about increasing the resilience of existing facilities or replacing existing facilities with things that are more resilient. That's a lot of money. And because we are limited in the way we can raise revenues, right now, if we continue down the path of using just our utility rates, the monthly bills that everybody pays, if we use those utility rates, it'll take us about 24 years to spend that $2.7 billion. The thing that I usually hear from people when I say that is like, I don't want to wait 24 years. I don't want to wait 24 years for you to do this work. Can't you do it more quickly? And so we are looking for ways to try to do it more quickly. We're going to be bringing to the voters in November a request for the voters to approve or disapprove of us going out for a general obligation bond that will allow us to bring in more money more quickly to do the projects more quickly. Right now, over the next 5 years, we project that we'll be spending about $550 million in those utilities using just utility rates. If the GO bond passes, we can add another $600 million. We can double the amount of work that we can do in the first 5 years. And so we are planning, but even if the GO bond doesn't pass, we'll continue to push forward on the SPAR program and try to get us resilient.
Jack, if I may jump in there on that. So
Go ahead.
This, I'll deny it if you tell any of my developer friends, but this is an incredibly important referendum coming up in November. And it is something that I personally think of as an investment in the city. It's a tax, yes. I really don't like property taxes. We own 4 buildings in downtown St. Pete. It'll shave millions of dollars off their collective value on face value. Not fun. But without these programs, without the acceleration that Claude is talking about, we are going to pay these costs one way or another. By building the infrastructure up front and doing as much as we can up front, which, by the way, and Claude mentioned this, we're only talking about, I'm using my fingers there, $600 million out of over a $2 billion project. We're still not going to be able to pull forward as much as we need to pull forward and start doing immediately. Claude can't advocate for it, I can. I just implore you all to consider the investment that we need to make in the city.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in there, Mac. So we've talked about what the government can do. Amber, you help lead a large grassroots community organization. So I wanted to ask you what regular folks can do. What's been your most effective strategy in bringing people together on these issues of climate change and affordable housing and all that?
Well, the most effective thing has been finding a common enemy. And right now, Duke Energy happens to be that guy. It's the truth. I'm involved in several organizations, and it seems like each organization has their own beef with Duke Energy. But right now, we have an initiative called Clean St. Pete. And Clean St. Pete is having Duke Energy held responsible for maintaining their equipment, especially in our alleys. Clean St. Pete started with us just going in and cleaning up the alleyways, and we realized a lot of this was not our mess. And we found out that 2 years later, Duke Energy was responsible for many of these trees that were growing into these power lines. So that is how we managed to bring people together. A lot of people, when the storms came, it was those very trees that knocked down those very power lines that had them without power, some people for months. One of our committee members, she was without power for 3 months. And it was Clean St. Pete that came in and kind of helped her talk to the right people, like, this is ridiculous. Like, what is going on here? But the work is real, and that's one way. Unfortunately, we have to come together around tragedy. But there is hope. We have brought hope. We have a wonderful organization. We don't just represent Black and brown communities. It's our main focus. But any community that needs a voice, that's who we're here for.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Applause, please. So we've mentioned here several times the need for community, for all of us to work together. And I want to applaud Amber and her group for speaking out and advocating on behalf of your interests and your team and your members, your community. We have found, actually, since the storms, one of the silver linings is that we are becoming much more engaged with community groups across the board. We've been very engaged with the Chamber of Commerce. You would expect that. We've been engaged with CONA, the Council of Neighborhood Associations. You would expect that. But we're also engaging with a lot of grassroots groups like Amber's, with Sierra Club, and we're talking to all of them, and they're all coming to us and saying, here's our priorities, here's what we would like to do, how can we work together to do this? And then we get those groups together, the business groups, the neighborhood groups, the advocacy groups, the environmental groups. We get them all together talking to each other with local government to try to make sure that we are all working together. So I do want to applaud you and thank you for that.
I wouldn't mind adding something to that as well, especially since you brought up the vote on Amendment 3 coming up in November. So I'll use Gulfport as a microcosm of what's going on in Florida, Florida being the most expensive flood insurance in the country, and Pinellas County in the top 10 most expensive for the counties in Florida. So it's a challenge. But Amendment 3, I know it's, I hate to say it may be a bit of a political gambit because it appeals to a lot of people. Yes, take this property tax away. But I think you mentioned earlier, they will get the money in another way. Cities, there's been a history of the erosion of home rule from the state level, present company excluded. You've always been very kind to local government that way. But there's been this constant, and you referenced it, this erosion of home rule, communities' ability to make their own decisions, to spend money the way that they need to make the rules that fit that community. And when these things happen, when we have an amendment like this, money like that is money that comes out of the coffers. So for small communities like Gulfport that still need that money to rebuild, our community is not rebuilt yet. We still have multiple structures that are not back in place at this point, and we're nearly 2 years down the road. So when we talk about that money going away, that's definitely going to affect the housing stock and where people choose to live. As we see these funds become unavailable to communities, they're going to become a lot less attractive to live in if they can't even maintain the infrastructure they have, much less have the funds to make your communities more resilient. So I believe this is going to present a real problem for us in the face of rising insurance rates. Even though it's capped at 18% increase per year, 18% is a significant amount. As we see people moving into neighborhoods, some of the neighborhoods that have still been affordable, if people are fleeing, as you said, climate gentrification, moving into neighborhoods that are higher up, we're going to see those places becoming less affordable. And the fact that all of our estimates on sea level rise over the last 30 years have been far too conservative. So I think what we're going to see is all of these things culminating to really create a scenario where this is going to continue to be a problem, and actually some of the policies that we're creating making it worse. For example, one thing I'd recommend for small communities, Gulfport was much better prepared than others because we're pretty self-sustaining, our own police, fire, public works, all these kind of things. When communities don't have these resources themselves or have contracts set with like debris disposal companies and things like that, equipment that they have contracted when the storm is coming, you can start getting your hands on what you need. Everybody's fighting for the same pool of resources at the exact same time. So the more you can do to get prepared, the better. And in terms of being at the victim of agencies above us, FEMA and the debacle that we saw with the state contractor that was doing a lot of the inspections and permitting processes that were really holding people up and causing a lot of delays for homeowners, for local government. If there was some way for us to be better in the know with what their policies will be, which is very tough when you have administrations changing potentially every 4 years and new heads of those agencies, how you stay in the loop. But I think communities need to be far better educated ahead of time in what the requirements and the protocols and the procedures are going to be before these storms hit, as opposed to everybody on the ground doing it, and homeowners, business owners, the people in Pinellas County suffer.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Let's stay with you for a second because you put your scientist hat on there for a minute. You know, we're obviously seeing the effects of climate change already. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. But what can Tampa Bay and Pinellas coastal counties here, what can we expect in like 30 to 50 years? Just sort of lay the land out.
Well, I mean, it's all the estimates that have kind of been what we've been basing some level of policy on have been too conservative thus far. And you know how, we haven't done enough to address rising sea levels. And Mr. Tankersley did a great job of referencing this is not just the coast. This is any body of water attached to it when water's pushed up. This is where our storm water gets pushed back up. There's no place to go once the water's high. So this can affect neighborhoods even further inland. But I think it's going to be a real struggle to prepare for that because of what you mentioned. People are always going to want to live near the water. We're attracted to it. 50% of the people in the world live within 100 miles of a coastline. So I think we need to rethink how we look at it, working with the contours of the landscape that we have, making development and land use plans that prepare for this, because this is not the climate change discussion and sea level rise discussion we grew up with. It's not down the road. We're living it right now. And I'm not even getting into the debate of whether it's human-induced climate change or natural. It's happening. The data is there. So, whatever the cause may be, it's increasing, and it's not a linear increase. The more landborne ice that enters our ocean, it's like putting an ice cube in your iced tea. It's raising that level a little bit at a time. And plus thermal expansion. The warmer our oceans get, warm water expands and takes up a greater volume. So all of our estimates, when we're trying to base sound policy on this science, which hopefully that's what we do, have not taken into account enough of this. So any bit that your policymakers, your legislators, your lawmakers can have a say in doing this, it's not a partisan issue. This is a survival issue. So we need to listen more to the science and pay attention more to these models, because we're really kind of falling behind at a time when we really need to be hitting the accelerator in terms of addressing this.
So if I may, the data absolutely supports it. We can step away from the causes and the philosophies of it. The data absolutely supports it. And so we at the city have been monitoring the elevation of the tides, particularly in Tampa Bay, for decades. And one of the reasons why we do it is because we have some communities, such as those mentioned before, Shore Acres, Riviera Bay. Some of the roads and streets in those communities are only about 1.5 to 2 feet above zero. And so we monitor, what the tides are. In 2005, we exceeded that 2-foot tide 3 times. 3 times in that year, in 2005, we had tides that exceeded 2 feet. In 2024, before the hurricanes, not the hurricanes, but before the hurricanes, we saw that happen 21 times. So it increased 7-fold. It went from 3 times to 21 times. And then Dr. Gary Mitchum at USF, he and his colleagues and scientists have put together their estimate is that by 2033, it's going to go from 21 times up to 70 times for these low-lying areas to have water in them regularly, day in, day out. And so the data is there. And so now our mission is to try to find ways to alleviate this, to try to limit the amount of water that is impacting us on a regular basis, but also learning to live with it. How can we elevate things so we can learn to live with it? One of the things that I think people forget is that the majority of our waterfront is privately owned. And so we have to respect that. And most of our wealth is in our own properties and in our own homes. And so these waterfront homes represent people's nest eggs, and we have to respect that and try to find ways to make sure that they don't carry the full burden, and that the community also doesn't carry the full burden. We carry it together.
Thanks, Claude. And I'll add on to what Sam and Claude have talked about, the data and what we're seeing in St. Pete. I think it really underscores why it makes it so difficult to redevelop a community like Shore Acres. I think there's around 1,200 homes in that community. it's costing roughly $350,000 to $500,000 to elevate a home. And the Elevate Florida program out of the state is trying to help about 1,000 homeowners with money, FEMA mitigation money from Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Pinellas County is going to get more money than other counties because we've had more impact, but that money alone can't even fix one neighborhood. And even if you elevated all of the structures in that neighborhood, if your roads are still a foot or two above mean high water level, maybe you can stay in your house, but you can't leave your house, or you go from downtown and you can't get to your home. So does the city elevate then all of the roads? And maybe there's a home that's elevated, but there's one that's not elevated yet. So all of a sudden, a few homes are safe, the roads flood, there's houses that are getting flooded just on a, August afternoon.
So with all,
If I may just jump in
Oh,
really
go
quick. So there's something that ties into all this it's actually already in the St. Pete code. It's called coastal high hazard. It's 41% of St. Pete's area, 41% is within the coastal high hazard. And that was, I want to say 2018, someone correct me if I'm wrong. And it was based on a snapshot of time of data. It said, okay, if there's a category 1 storm about to hit this area, what's the storm surge going to look like? And about 41% of the city in that analysis in 2018 was deemed in that radius. So that was a snapshot in time that the coastal high hazard says, and this is what it actually does, it says you're restricted from adding additional houses, more density in this area. If there's a single family home, you can tear it down and put a new single family home there. But if you're adding density, you must do mitigations. What are mitigations? So you can either evacuate, stay at home, or go to a shelter of some kind if there's a storm coming. Mitigations are how do we fund those things? How do you elevate the house? If we were to build more along the coastlines, we're going to keep building there. But for the reasons we've all talked about, the things that are getting built there are very expensive, large single-family homes. Not necessarily what was there before. Sam, you mentioned this. A lot of older homes were there, people that paid off their mortgages decades ago, and they can't afford to elevate. So what gets built is a large single-family home, starts to very much change the character of the neighborhood. One way that we can do this and start to redirect some of that demand for waterfront living, through the coastal high hazard, we could charge certain fees, certain extra impact fees, we call them in development, that take into account the risk to the government, to the neighborhood of where that home is being built. So yeah, maybe you get to do a duplex instead of a single family home, but you need to pay for the associated cost of these mitigants. Whether that means we're building more shelters, hardening our evacuation infrastructure, we have to start directing funding towards these goals if we're going to keep building on the waterfront, and we're going to keep building on the waterfront. It's just a question of what that looks like and how we're directing the funds from it.
So Matt, can I ask, you're suggesting something proactive that would cut into your bottom line. How are others, maybe not here in St. Pete, I don't see that going over very well.
I'll pitch it for you. Yeah, so right now, in the coastal high hazard, additional density is effectively illegal. If you want to build there, you're building a spec home, large single family, some call them McMansions, pejorative, whatever you want to call them. If you allow developers to build incremental density, I'm not talking about putting towers in shore acres. It's a bad idea, even I can agree with that. But if you allow incremental density, it has to be elevated, and in exchange for that density, developers can make more money on a denser bit of construction, they've got to pay into that fund. There's all sorts of models for this. They're already in our code. If you want to build a taller building, even in downtown St. Pete, you must chip into the Workforce Housing Fund or the Streetscape Improvement Fund. There's various examples of this. And then we have things like impact fees, like, hey, you're going to put this tower here, that's going to increase the amount of strain on the sewer system. Therefore, you got to write this check to the utility department to make sure that you're covering that cost. There's plenty of models that exist out there where it's got to be a little carrot and a stick. All stick, you're right, not going to go anywhere in my opinion. But if you give developers something in exchange and we all feel comfortable that the price they're paying for that creates enough mitigants, it can work.
One thing that I've seen in Tallahassee, and not specifically the coastal high hazard zone, but the coastal construction line, there was a bill a couple of years ago that essentially stripped power away from local governments in limiting the density of new developments in coastal areas. And what that law said, which I debated against on the floor, was that a developer could build to the highest height or density of something within that zone. So if they removed a 2-story 1950s motel on the beach, but the trade winds is next door, they're legally allowed to build another trade winds. And so what that's doing is it's actually concentrating more development in some of the most vulnerable areas. It was all to allow one developer in South Florida to get their project done, and as a result, the rest of Florida has to suffer from that.
Yeah, we have Live Local. That's even more extreme example of that. Within a mile, you can match the height.
I hate to cut you guys off. This has been great, but we have to get to audience questions next, so I'm going to pivot really quickly. Our first question is, if another storm occurs comparable to Helene, what's likely to happen to house prices and insurability? Mac, I think that's probably a good one for you.
Sure. I mean, it's a pretty easy response. Insurance will go up. Home prices will go down. The more it costs to own a building, whether it's a single-family residential structure or if it's a commercial office building like we own in our portfolio, the more you have to spend to operate them, the less you're willing to pay for it. It's not a terribly complicated bit of calculation. It's about how do we harness development interest? There's a tremendous amount of development interest in St. Pete. That's not going away. How do we harness it and direct it, and yes, tax it and charge it fees in a way that is consistent with the long-term expectations that Sam described? It's just a matter of directing it in a way that is the least harmful, or I like to be a little bit more optimistic about it, that gets us to where we want to be as a city.
Our next question, what will it take to encourage local governments to say no to development if the infrastructure is not able to handle the development? Does anyone want to take it? Sam, you might?
Sure, absolutely. Well, one of the things that's an issue with that is there's a law that's often referred to as the Burt-Harris Act, where you can't infringe on someone's ability to make a reasonable profit off of their property. So when it comes to, you can make all kinds of, you mentioned the carrot and the stick approach, you can incentivize more reasonable, smaller scale development. But in many cases, unless you already have height restrictions and rules in place, you can't necessarily stop it. And that's one of the drawbacks of living in a nation like we live in, is people have the right to some extent to do what they want with their property. So the hope is that you can kind of educate a desire and a willingness in folks to build to a smaller scale, to build things more resilient, as opposed to maybe necessarily such a grandiose size, but making something that's going to be resilient, that's going to last and survive storms, and incentivize that, because you really can't, in the end, completely control what people choose to build. We've seen a huge increase in Gulfport of where these little 800, 900 square foot, on-grade bungalows, somebody comes in, buys that property, knocks it down, and they build out to every setback, the maximum footprint. So you got a few problems with that. You're losing your tree cover, you're losing your canopy. Those root systems in a sandy soil help maintain that soil staying in place when you get floodwaters, when you get sheet runoff from rainstorms. Also, you've just built out as large as you can. You change the scale of that neighborhood, and it starts to change the feel of that neighborhood. I mean, I know that's such a subjective term, but scale changes character. So when that starts to become the norm, it changes. So, but there's a real difficulty with regulating that, because again, we come back to opportunities for litigation if you infringe on people's right to profit off their home, and it's one of those where do your rights end and mine begin kind of a scenario.
I'd like to touch on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I would say with my activist hat, residents, use your voices. We're not politically engaged as we should be. Right now it's election season and it's fashionable to vote. So you have an increased amount of voters on election season, and then after it's over, we go back to the way things were. But developers can only do in your city what you allow them to do. They don't like pressure, they don't like bad press. So it really is a matter of us as regular people getting out and being more politically engaged than you normally would be. And it could be something as simple as writing your city council person. Come to a couple meetings. You have a neighborhood association. Get involved in the neighborhood association. If you have no neighborhood association, make one. I did. We did not have a living one, so I brought it back. So that's what the answer is for regular residents.
Next question. Given increasing storm intensity and sea level rise, when will we begin to retreat from investing in coastal infrastructure?
Never.
Agreed.
And the city will always invest in our infrastructure to serve the community. So as long as there is private property on the coast, we're going to have facilities to serve them.
None of you see coastal retreat as an option in the future, or?
I think it will become more and more incumbent on how much money someone has to spend to engage in that level of risk. So I think we'll see fewer and fewer people willing to take that risk on as this increases, because as the climate warms, as the sea level rises, extreme weather of all kinds gets more intense. We see that most in rapid intensification of hurricanes. Climate change didn't create hurricanes, but it certainly makes them more unpredictable and get scary a lot faster. So I think it's going to be an ultimate pricing out. There will be fewer and fewer people who can afford to take the risk to invest there.
Yeah, the mechanism for that is insurance costs. Notwithstanding, we have a federal program called NFIP that subsidizes flood costs, but it also has the perverse consequence of encouraging more development along the waterfront. Programs like that distort the market and encourage development along the waterfront when we have countervailing programs at the local level saying you shouldn't do that. Government at varying levels is working in opposite directions.
So there's also data to support this. Forgive me, I'm an engineer, I can't help it, I'm sorry. So here within the city of St. Petersburg, we have 244 miles of coastline within the city. 244 miles of coastline. Of that, only 17 miles are publicly owned. Of the 244 miles of coastline, 127 miles are natural. A lot of people don't probably realize that, but a little less than half of it is natural. It's not been hardened. 117 miles are seawalls. 100 miles of those are privately owned seawalls. And there are 11,500 privately owned waterfront property seawalls in the city. 11,500 individual properties that are waterfront with seawalls. And so that's the challenge of talking about retreat. For retreat to be really effective, you have to do a community-wide retreat. You can't just have a house here, a house there, a house, the other. You have to have a community-wide retreat. But if 10% of the properties in St. Pete, our coastal properties, are privately owned, then it has to be a community discussion, and we have to make sure that we are not leaving those 11,500 properties out to dry or out to get wet. Perfect.
I'm glad we got to it. It was one of my questions too. In times after disaster, why not lift fees for permitting? Also, are there plans to use AI to speed up permitting?
Well, I know that after the hurricanes, the city waived the redevelopment fees. And one thing that I did that I was able to accomplish with Senator Sigley this year was to include a policy in a building and permit bill that gives cities and counties opportunities to bring in more inspectors and plans examiners after natural disasters by using state term contracts. So essentially the state does the job of vetting contractors, and then any city or county can tap into that. And then also expanding MOUs with other states. So if you think of when all the linemen come into the community to help out Duke Energy, those are people from Arkansas, Texas, all over the place. We haven't been able to do that with permitting because our Florida building codes are more stringent than a lot of those other states. But with this new law, by working under the direction of the building official in that local community, someone can come in from another state for 1 year after the disaster and help to provide additional manpower to get those permits out the door faster.
How about that AI question? Claude, do you see, it's a little out of your department, but do you see any building departments utilizing AI in the future for things like this?
If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd say no. But a lot of things have changed with AI, and it's becoming more and more prevalent in all of our activities, so I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
Amber, I think this next question is probably a good one for you. How can local grassroots organizations build enough political power to challenge state-level decisions on environmental policy?
The first thing would be information. Learn about the policy. There's so many grassroots organizations. I had to do a lot of policy research just to sit up here on this panel. There was so much that I didn't realize I didn't know. We had a discussion at our last neighborhood association meeting about programs versus policy. And the argument I made was that policy creates programs. So if the programs you have are not working, it's because there's a policy attached to that program that is not working. But we get so caught up in, we need a program for this, we need a program for that. And we don't realize, no, you need to change that policy so that program can work better. So getting people to understand, wean yourself off of programs and get into policy creation and see how that, understand how that goes, that uphill battle. It is an uphill battle. I almost got my political science degree when I almost did it. It was very discouraging when I found out how hard it is to change legislation. Oh my God. But now that I'm in grassroots organizing, it's just a matter of getting the people involved. Make sure that they understand what stake they have in it. We have a lot of rhetoric and, like I said, it's a political season and, in those times when it's not a political season, that's when those decisions are made when you're not looking anymore and you're not in that room. And it's a matter of getting the right people in the rooms and making sure the neighborhood understands the ramifications. If you don't get involved, this is what's gonna happen to you. And I don't think we make it personal enough. So we're working now, and in many of the grassroots organizing that we do, we're making it more personal. We're getting more information out, and we're being more technical. Before we were more emotional, and we're finding that you do gotta take a little emotion out and get more technical. These are the technical terms you need to know, and this is how it affects you.
All right, our next question. How do you see the property tax amendment impacting government's role in preparing for storms and their impacts? I think we touched on that a little bit, but if anyone wants to go any deeper?
I'll just clarify that there's been 2 property tax discussions up here. One of them is something that came down from the state, which is an amendment that'll be on the ballot for all Floridians, which would drastically increase the homestead exemption first year to $150,000, the next year to $250,000. In the city of St. Petersburg, the last numbers I heard were that the first year it would eliminate about $57 million of revenue. By year 2, it'd be $75 million. The stormwater flood reduction plan for Shore Acres, I think, is $67 million. We got 3 of it from the state. But if that amendment passes, those are going to be some of the programs that are not going to be funded as quickly or as expansively. Most of our city and counties, their property tax goes towards public safety. In the city of St. Petersburg, I think it's 92% in Pinellas Park that I also represent. They pay $1.20 for public safety for every dollar that they bring in. So most of that budget is going to police, to fire, to EMS, the things that keep our communities safe, then things like maintaining our roads, our sewers, our water supply. I would absolutely recommend voting no on that if you want to maintain the quality. If you want to maintain or even increase the quality of life that we have in St. Petersburg. And then the amendment that Claude referenced, the general operations bond, that's just for the city of St. Pete, and that would be additional tax to provide those bonds to accelerate. So let's vote yes on that one and no on 3.
And thank you. And just to be very clear too, because I've been asked this question, and it's a good question. If the general obligation bond passes, can we use that money for anything else other than stormwater, wastewater, and water? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Because of the way that the referendum will be written, it'll specifically state, for these purposes, stormwater flooding, resiliency for wastewater, resiliency for water, can we borrow the $600 million? And that will limit the ability for us to spend that on anything other than those.
Just want to throw in one point on that. So just on SPAR, right now we have two paths forward on how to fund it. Either utilities fees. Everyone in this room probably pays utilities fees. You use water, electricity, all those things, primarily water in this case. That money's going to come out one way or another. The contrast is if we vote yes on this upcoming amendment, there will be an increase in property taxes. But think of a vacant lot. You may have one in your neighborhood. Maybe an investor owns it, and they're waiting for the value to grow over time. That investor is going to pay exactly zero as part of this resiliency package unless we pass this amendment. So all this is doing, if we don't pass this, is it shifts the burden of the cost to people that are actually living here, as opposed to people sitting on vacant parcels of land. They get the free benefit of all the infrastructure money, but no cost.
I've got another local government question from the audience. Local municipalities are reading the rules very differently regarding permitting. This leads to disparity and inequality. The question is basically, how do we get cohesion here? How do we all get on the same page about permitting after the
I would
storms?
love to speak to that one, just real quick. That was one of the biggest issues we had. The damage from the storm aside, the scrambling, no matter how well prepared you are, it's still a state of emergency and very difficult, very chaotic when that happens. When you add into that inconsistency from federal and state agencies in how these rules are applied, how inspections are performed, what the training requirements are for people who do those inspections. And by the way, if you don't have your own community development and your own inspectors on staff, you are in a queue with every other community who doesn't have that to get these folks to ramp that up. And if you get people coming in that are contractors doing that work, you could have a range of training from day one to, been in the field for 30 years. So these inconsistencies and how those are applied leaves local government at the end of, let's say, say you get the last page of the IKEA instructions for your coffee table. That's all you got. Everything else is coming down to you. You got to figure it out to that last step. And that puts a real challenge on local governments, and it leaves people in the lurch in those communities. And of course, the first people that are the front line, your local government is to blame. And I think we need to make those streamlined at higher levels so there's some consistency administration to administration so we don't have this learning the rules when the game's already underway scenario.
Yeah, if you have more to say on that, Sam, the next question, it seems the 50% FEMA rule is causing more hardship than good. It also seems President Trump seeks to repeal the rule. Why not? What should replace it?
I don't know what would be a good replacement for that, but the way it is right now doesn't leave a whole lot of flexibility, and it seems very arbitrary based on who does your inspection and who checks that inspection. Because depending on who does that inspection, you could get two experienced folks having a very different idea of what 50% is. And I think a lot of people ended up putting themselves in harm's way trying to, and understandably get some work done on a damaged home, just so they could continue living in that home. And then that caused problems for them, things that delay the permitting problems. So in the end, I don't know what the best solution would be, but unless there's something that's a little more forgiving and flexible than that 50% rule, and a way that it can be applied more equally, the way it worked out this time really showed all the holes in the boat in terms of how we administered and dealt with that policy.
I know what the 50% rule is because I'm more informed than most people, but can somebody go into detail? What is the 50% rule for those who don't?
So essentially, if you have a home that is damaged by a storm, by flooding, and to rebuild it, if it takes more than 50% of the value of the home to rebuild it, let's say the home is worth $200,000 and it would cost $300,000. Is that the right math?
And it's just the structure.
In
just the
St.
structure.
Pete, it's 49%. But if it costs more than 49 or 50% to rebuild that structure, you then have to bring it up to the current building code standards. So a lot of the homes that flooded were what you call slab on grade. It's just a slab, probably 1950s, 1960s homes. You would have to elevate that probably 10 or 12 feet if you wanted to rebuild that structure. And you can imagine that comes at a significant cost. And the reason why is because the National Flood Insurance Policy and FEMA are connected. And so the idea behind that was that if the federal government is going to take on some of the financial burden of helping people to rebuild, we want you to rebuild in a safer way going forward. The effect is that it has been very costly and burdensome for residents.
And the fear was that city governments, local governments could lose their national flood insurance protection, right? That's the argument that was used?
Yes, there's requirements for cities and counties to maintain their records on the permits that were issued and the work that was done. So that's why they will say, you need to pull a permit. We're offering these permits for free right now, but you have to pull a permit because if the city isn't issuing those permits, then the flood insurance rates for the entire community can increase because there are incentives for cities to do proactive measures, like ensuring that buildings are rebuilt in the safest manner.
This question is addressed to Mac. Do current zoning laws or building regulations make it easier to build affordable, environmentally friendly housing? What's having the largest impact?
So St. Pete has a lot of great rules and zoning around what we call workforce housing. It's often conflated with affordable housing. It basically means that if you earn at about 120% of the area median income, and it's looked at as a household, so it could be a couple, so 120% of area median income, if you build housing like that as a developer, the city will let you build a little bit bigger building, maybe a little bit taller, maybe a little bit wider, but generally still has to fit within the design standards. So St. Pete has that pretty much all over the place with already baked into its zoning. How much it gets used, I couldn't quantify exactly for the group. What I can tell you is every tower that you have seen in downtown St. Pete that has gone up, that's more than about 10 stories over the past 10 years, has chipped into the Workforce Housing Fund, a pretty significant chunk of their construction costs, about 1% times your hard costs for a $300 million project, which is those big towers you see up. It's $3 million that they were obligated to contribute into that workforce housing fund. The city then deploys those dollars to help subsidize affordable housing projects, typically in high and dry areas. I'm not aware of any affordable housing projects the city's subsidizing that are in floodplains. So there's existing programs that intersect with affordability. I don't know of any specific program. Well, actually, that's not true. The downtown does also give you a little extra density if you build a LEED building. LEED is a national environmental standard. It means you have to use low energy devices, strong windows that reflect a lot of sunlight. Outside of the downtown, though, I'm not aware of any direct environmental incentives. Maybe Claude knows more.
Next question. Do you think climate change bringing more intense storms is the main reason for the home insurance crisis?
Yes.
You want to go on?
I think I already stated a lot of this, but the extreme weather period, not just the tropical disturbances and the rapidly intensifying hurricanes, of which we're seeing many more than normal. We've seen more than our share in the last 5-6 years in the Gulf. But droughts, like the drought that we're in right now, uncharacteristic weather, places that are used to precipitation now becoming dry, places that are dry getting too much. More extreme weather in general is a function of a warming climate. Even cold weather events, getting snow in the panhandle. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but the way warm air travels, moving to the poles and warming the poles faster than it warms the rest, you end up with an average increase in temperature, but the poles warm the fastest, and that's where our ice is. So it's hard to picture ice being a problem for us in July in Florida. But ice really is going to have a massive impact on us. So yeah, sea level rise and climate change are already driving these things. Even if we're not attributing it to it, it is probably the biggest driver. That just combined with how we handle policy decisions that surround and engage those topics.
Yeah, I want to stay on this for a second. Rep across the legislature has tried to address this with special sessions. Is anyone talking like Claude up in Tallahassee, or what do those conversations look like?
Well, I have been one of only 2 environmental
Sorry, Sam.
scientists up in Tallahassee, so I like to throw some facts at people too. But they're usually met with kind of talking points that you hear from the special interest. There's a lot of influence from the investor-owned utilities in outlawing wind energy and trying to make rooftop solar more difficult, in putting restrictions on how communities can use renewable energy and giving preference for that. So facts work a little bit, but having deep pockets and campaign contributions work a lot better.
All right. Well, thank you to our panelists, and thank you to our sponsor, Foundation for a Healthy St. Pete. Yeah, thank you all for coming, too. This event has been recorded, and a link is going to be emailed to everybody who registered for tonight's event. We're also going to have a brief survey if you'd like to weigh in and share your feedback. Our next event is happening September, so be on the lookout for more details there. And on behalf of the Tampa Bay Times, thank you again for being here. Have a wonderful evening.